Hi, I'm Miso, and welcome back to Astonished Animations. I finally made myself a 3D Vtuber model. I mean, it's just the same model, but I have tracking now and all that. It just makes me feel like I'm part of the Vtuber community right now. But now, let's get into the tutorial. And today, we will be making miso soup. If you have been to any Japanese restaurant, it is likely that you have already tried miso soup. The miso soup that comes with a full set of meal is always the cherry on top for me. It just completes the meal. So today, let us make this miso soup in Blender. And in the process, I will also share some useful geometry nodes set up for things like soups and drinks. Let's start by setting up our scene. I'm using Blender 4.5. Make sure you're in Eevee, and under Color Management, make sure the View Transform is set to Standard. Also, under Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, make sure Node Wrangler is turned on, because it's gonna make things easier. Before we get into the process, make sure you know all the basics in Blender, as I will not go into details for those parts. To start off, make a bowl, and here I'll just very briefly describe the process. Use a fat cylinder, add a few loop cuts, make use of proportional editing, the sharp fall off works the best. Make the inside faces as well, and extrude and inset faces to make the base. Next, I will take an edge loop from the inside of the bowl, duplicate that loop, and hit P to separate it into another object. Go into edit mode for the new object, and I will hit E and S to extrude inwards. Repeat the step several times for more geometry, as we will need them later. Hit M to merge the last edge loop into a single vertex, and here we have the surface of our soup. Then, let's model the tofu. Make a cube. Add the bevel and subdivision surface modifiers, and scatter some tofu cubes on the surface of the soup. Now let's work on the shading. I will first add an HDRI texture for the background. This is optional, but I want some nice extra lighting here. So I brought in an HDRI, which is downloaded from Polyhaven. Moving on, I will make the bowl's material. Keeping the principled BSDF, I will set the base color to black. And I'll make it slightly reflective to get some nice reflections from the HDRI. Then, I will layer some cell shading on top. I will create a diffuse BSDF, making sure it has the same roughness as the principled BSDF, and add a shader to RGB and a color ramp afterwards. I will then add the shader to RGB after the principled BSDF, so we can mix the principled BSDF and the cell shading together. Set the color ramp to multiply, keep the factor kinda low, and we have some extra cell shading on our bowl. I'll then create a duplicate of the bowl material and assign this material to the inside faces of the bowl, but I will change the principled color to red instead. And now we have ourselves that classic Japanese bowl. For the tofu material, I will give it a simple shader with just the diffuse, shader to RGB, and a color ramp. Pick some yellowish white color for the color ramp, and the shader is done. And here, we are getting into the more complex stuff for the soup surface material. The approach that I'll be using was found in Benjamin Weimer's tutorial on creating water ripples. Make sure you check out his video as well. We will start by selecting our soup surface plane and going into the Object Data tab. In Color Attributes, I will add a new attribute called Color. and this attribute will be used for the geometry nodes that we are about to work on. Go into Geometry Nodes workspace and add a new Geometry Nodes. In the Geometry Nodes, we want to reference our Tofu object, or any object that will intersect with the soup surface plane. So I'll go into the 3D viewport, select the Tofu, and hit M to transfer it into a new collection. I will call the collection Food for now. We can then select the plane again and drag the entire food collection into our geometry nodes. This way, we will get a collection info node. I will then add a node called Geometry Proximity. We want to connect the collection info with the geometry proximity, but since the output of the collection info node are instances, we want to add another realized instances node in between. Select Relative for the collection info node and connect the three nodes together like this. I will then add a map range node and connect the toMin slot to the group input, so we can modify the value from the modifier stack later. I will drag the result to the group output, and I will go into the modifiers tab, go to our geometry nodes, to the output attributes, and type in the name of our color attribute that we have created into the result field. Back to the geometry nodes, I will then click on this arrow here and change the type of the result output to color. Now we can head back into the shader of our soup plane, create a new material, and bring in an input attribute node. Then type in the name of our color attribute, that is color. If we take a look at the node, we can see a mask showing the edges where the tofu intersects with the soup. That is the effect of the geometry proximity node. Now if I bring the bowl object into the same collection as the tofu, we can now see the edge mask of the bowl itself as well. Let's delete the principled BSDF and add a color ramp after the attribute node. We can flip the black and white and start extracting the edges by bringing the black towards the white. We can also adjust the toMin value of the geometry nodes to get a softer mask, but make sure you adjust the color ramp accordingly. To get a smoother mask, you want a good amount of geometry on the soup plane, as we are essentially using vertex color. Next, we want to add a noise texture after the color ramp, so the color ramp is plugged into the vector input. I will then create a mixed color node, set it to multiply, connect the noise texture vector to A and the color ramp to B. This way we are only getting the noise around the intersections, and everything else is gonna be black. With the noise selected, I will hit Ctrl T to bring in the texture coordinate and mapping nodes. Unplug the mapping node, Ctrl Shift right click the mapping node, and drag onto the color ramp. This way we can get a mixed color node between the two. Then plug the result into the noise vector. We can adjust the mix factor to get a mix between the distorted noise along the edges and the original noise. Next, we can add a color ramp after the multiply node and set it to constant. Bring over the white point to get back those edges. Let me group all these nodes together into a frame by selecting all of these nodes and hitting Shift P. We can rename the frame on the side and give it a color. I will then get back into edit mode, select the entire plane and unwrap it from the top view using the project from view bounds option. Then I will add a texture coordinate node followed by a gradient texture. Set the gradient texture to quadratic sphere. If we take a look at the gradient texture, we can see the gradient is offset to the side. So bring in a mapping node in between and change the X and Y location to -0.5. Bring in a color ramp and put it after the gradient texture. Choose some color for the miso soup. As the miso soup is more concentrated in the middle, I changed the white color to something like dark orange or brown color. And for the black, I changed it to a lighter brown. We want to now add some transparency to the soup. So bring in an emission shader and a transparent shader. And again, to mix these nodes together, we can make use of the Node Wrangler shortcut, Ctrl-Shift right-click on one node and drag onto another to mix them together. You can see how we have a lot of noise on the soup surface. So go to the material settings and change the render method to blend. Now that's much better. We can then plug the colors into the emission color. Make another color ramp and plug the gradient into it. We can then plug the color ramp into the factor of the mix shader. As the miso soup is usually more transparent on the edges, I will flip the black and white and bring the two colors together. So the soup is more transparent around the edge and more opaque at the center. Let me group these new nodes together and call them the base color. But I guess I should move these shader nodes back out for better organization. To mix the base color and the proximity edge highlights, we can add a mix color node, plug the soup color into A, and the proximity black and white color ramp into the factor. We can then choose a light yellow color for the B color, and then plug the mix result into the emission color. And now this is our soup shader. But you know what's missing? The seaweed. So let's get a plane, scale it down into a strip, and add a few loop cuts. I can then add a subdivision surface modifier and add some supporting edges around the ends. I will then add a displace modifier and change the texture to a cloud texture. Add a solidify modifier to give it a bit of thickness and smooth it again with another subdivision surface modifier. Just one subdivision is enough. We can then hop into the edit mode and adjust the shape of the seaweed. Shade it smooth and put it into the soup. For the material, I will duplicate the tofu material and change the colors to green for now. In edit mode, duplicate the seaweed and spread them into the soup. Make sure you add some seaweed inside the soup in the middle as well. I want the seaweed to be a little bit more shiny, so I will add a glossy BSDF, connect it to a shader to RGB, and then connect it to a constant color ramp in the seaweed material. Mix the new black and white color ramp with the original one and set the mode to add. Adjust the roughness of the glossy BSDF, change the white color in the color ramp into a light green, and use a very low factor for the add node. So we have a tiny bit of reflection on the seaweed. To give the soup more depth, I will duplicate the soup surface, make a duplicate for the material as well, and for this material, I will delete all the proximity nodes, basically just having the base color nodes. Plug the soup colors into the emission color and let me bring this plane towards the middle of the bowl. I will adjust the color ramp by bringing the white point a little bit over to the middle and fade the edge for a little bit. I think the proximity highlights are a little bit too strong, so I will go back into the soup material and change the white color of the proximity color ramp to a light gray, basically making the highlight more transparent. Let's add some outlines. We'll start with a bowl. Add a new material under each of the bowl materials, change the material to an emission shader, and turn on back face culling for both camera and shadow. Set the emission color to black and add a solidify modifier. Set the thickness to a small negative value. Under normal, check flip, and under materials, set the material offset to 1. You may run into some shading issues, but as soon as you properly add in the outline materials, we will have some nice outlines. We can now do the same for the tofu and the seaweed, just with different colors. And now, we have ourselves a nice bowl of miso soup. So I hope you guys liked the video. If you have a favorite dish, please tell me in the comments and I'll try to make them in my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. It's so fun. This is so fun.